Hey guys, welcome to episode 7 of the Armchair Athlete podcast. I'm your host, Patrick. I appreciate you all listening. Before we get started, please remember to like and subscribe to the video, turn on notifications so you don't miss any uploads. And if you have missed any previous episodes, make sure you go back, listen to them, give them a like as well. Really helps out the channel, starting to grow now up to 7 episodes deep, trying to continue that moving forward and try and continue to grow from where we are. So in today's episode, I'll be going through and discussing Liverpool's most recent win against Brentford at home, Arnie Slot's first home game, and discussing some of the things I've noticed about the new way Liverpool are playing this season. Then I'll be discussing the Adelaide Crows season overall now that the AFL season has wrapped up, and sort of discuss my feelings and thoughts as a fan. And then I'll also be going through and grading every AFL team season that missed out on finals. We'll leave the finals teams until the end because obviously how they go in that run will dictate their grade. But we'll go through and grade the teams that did miss out and give a quick few thoughts on just each team and what maybe their off season might look like, etc. And maybe next season what I think they can expect to see. So let's just get into it with Liverpool's first game. Liverpool were able to get a win over Brentford in Arnie Slot's first home game of the season. The game finished 2-0 thanks to goals from Luis Diaz and Mo Salah. And overall, I think the biggest thing you can take away from this game is that Liverpool just appear to be a much calmer side than they did in previous years. And that's not a knock on Jurgen Klopp at all. It's just one of the changes in the way they play. Jurgen Klopp typically their first thought was often to move the ball forward and sort of use a bit more direct passes as well, whereas Arne Slot seems to want the team to play around the back a bit more, bring the defence out. And that was one of the things in pre-season we're kind of curious to see is how will the possession side go against low block teams. How will that play out? Because Liverpool face a lot of teams who just sit back at the edge of their area and just want to defend and see how to draw. So how does the possession side sort of compare to it? Like if they're happy for us to just keep the ball, how will we work around it? Because low blocks have been something that Liverpool have struggled with in recent years. And it was really interesting. One of the biggest things I noticed, and I've seen this mentioned in a few other videos analysing the game, that Liverpool would actually often, rather than just play it around the edge of their area, what they would actually do is pass it back and try and draw them out a bit more. So they'd go play them back deep into their own half so that they could then go forward and create some more space. And I thought it was quite interesting. It looked effective. This weekend will be another big test against Manchester United away. But from what we've seen in these first 2 games, the calmness around the team is clearly the biggest change. And it's great to see. It was nice when you wake up that game was 3:30 in the morning here. So to wake up, be able to watch that and kind of once Salah scored that second goal, you're a bit like, oh, this is nice and relaxing. I will be able to actually get back to sleep after this game ends, which so often under Klopp, it was exciting and incredible to watch, but there'd be games where I'd be like, well, I'm not going to be able to sleep before I have to go to work because my heart's racing so much and I've got so much adrenaline and energy that I just can't get back to sleep. So it was kind of nice for those to wake up in the middle of the night and then see the game, see us win, be quite relaxing, go back to sleep. And so that was a nice change from what we've had in previous years. And overall, I think it's a good start. As I said, United will be a big test. And how do we approach that? Obviously, they've had a couple of games where they got the late winner against Fulham. They managed to see that out. And then Brighton scoring the late winner on them. So not the start that they were after, but it's always tough, those games, always nervous for them. They'll definitely be looking to play. One nice thing is that Arne Slot does have a winning record against Erik ten Hag from their time in Holland. So that's definitely good. I feel like with a team with a bit more confidence as well. So that definitely helps. I think it was interesting as well when you saw the possession side and us drawing the team out when we would play further back and drawing their low block a bit further forward, is it meant that those switches that Trent would switch across to Diaz and the Van Dijk switch to Salah that has proven so effective in recent years, that's once again sort of open those up. They're not as frequent, those passes, but when they work, or when we do them, they're more effective. And so that was good to see. I mean, you saw Salah's goal, I believe it was Salah's goal against Ipswich came from that. And then the Salah chance against Brentford, where would have been a contender for goal of the season for sure, where it's just the 1-2 triangles along the box as he moves around. Because although Salah doesn't have the same pace he used to have in recent years, where he was just faster than everyone on the pitch, he's still a quick player, but he's not to that same level. His movement and understanding to get around is second to none. And so that goal was a tremendous display of that. And that's come again from that Van Dijk switch across. So overall, you can see that there's still those aspects of Jurgen Klopp's side and his play style that we're still keeping, and I would expect to keep some of those things. I mean, I couldn't see a complete overhaul and changing, and it's to be expected as well with such a short period of time. He's really had to implement his style when you consider Jurgen Klopp had, 7 years or so. Arne Slot's only had a few months to implement it, and some of those players even less, given they were at the international tournaments and came back late for it. So it'll be interesting to see how it evolves as well, and when he eventually brings in some of his own players, whether that does end up being this window, where there's a lot of rumours around Chiesa expecting to be signed by Liverpool from Juventus. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. They signed a goalkeeper as well, who I don't believe is expected to actually join the club for a couple of years. I think he's being loaned out, and then kind of in a couple of years when Alisson's a bit older, then it will be probably a contest for that number 1 shirt, which I appreciate the forward planning. I think that's really good to think about those kinds of things. It's tough when you've got holes in the team currently that aren't being addressed to go and spend that money on a goalkeeper. Feels like a bit of a waste, but not planning for the long term is where you typically see teams get into issues. So at least we've got that. But getting back to the game itself, it was really impressive to see. Mo looked, as I say, he's not as quick as he used to be, but it looks like that full off season's helped him. And typically when he's had a full off season, he's come in to the season and kicked off. I mean, he rarely has a bad season at all. He's an incredible player, and I discussed it, I think, in last week's episode, that I think he's personally the best winger in Premier League history, or definitely up there for it. So that off season, he just looks fresh. He looks energized. Looks great, and it was quite a dominant display from Liverpool. I mean, Brentford in the first half, it was a bit more of an even game. I mean, the goal comes from a counter-attack, and it's a well-worked counter-attack, but it wasn't overly threatening, I don't think, Brentford. It felt a bit more like Liverpool. We're just kind of feeling them out and trying to get a sense of how they'll play, get ourselves into the game and build up from it, rather than a big, fast, hot start. So that was kind of how I saw. And then I don't think Brentford actually had a shot on target, or a shot at all, potentially, after the 55th minute. I think I saw the stat. So, which is wild. It shows level of control. I mean, Liverpool has 62% possession with 19 shots, 8 on target. That was, it is just indicative of the control that they had in the game. I thought in midfield, Trent, while he was on the field, was really impressive. I think Gravenberch, once again, had a great game. Szoboszlai, you could just see his class on the ball when he got it. McAllister had a bit of a quieter game, especially in the first half, but grew into it a little bit more. And overall, I think there was no bad performers across the ground. Even the subs, when they came on, were trying to provide an impact. I don't think there's much to the Trent situation, if I'm being honest. It looked as though it was someone who was keen to impact the game, getting subbed off. I think a lot can be made of those conversations from a very short period where you don't even know what was said. They could have been discussing anything else in the game, and rather than his actual substitution. You just don't know what's happening in those conversations, and so it's a case of, I think people want there to be drama and news around it. Like, there was clips of Trent like shrugging and waving his hands after the game, walking around, but then you actually see the full clip and he's smiling, and it looks as though like that shrug and wave was actually to someone he knew in the crowd and was about that. So I think it was a lot to be made of nothing, and people in general are just a bit nervous about the fact he doesn't have a contract renewal yet. So they're a bit looking for any signs that he might be disgruntled and wanting to move on. So I think it's just a bit of on edge, but overall, I don't think there's too much to really be worried about it regards to that. But to kind of summarize, I think it was a great performance. Liverpool are looking good so far this season. I think United will be the big test to see how things will play out and how we'll look for the remainder of the season. And I'm sure as Arnie Slot sort of has a bit more time and gets more into the season, we'll see his style evolve a bit more and see a bit more of what he's after. And I believe transfer deadline day is also this week, so it'll be interesting to see if come that game whether Liverpool have any new signings. I doubt they participate in the game, but it'd still be exciting to get some players in to help, just some reinforcements to help the rest of the season. But good performance overall, and let me know your thoughts on both Liverpool's performances, any other teams down below, surprise packages so far in the first couple of games, players you're really impressed with. All of that, let me know how you think Liverpool and Arnie Slot will get on for the rest of the season as well, down in the comments below. The Adelaide Crows AFL seasons for 2024 is finally wrapped up, and my God, could we have finished that any worse? And it's not even just from a performance point of view. I mean, the game against Sydney, expected to lose, we did lose, and there's no shocks there. Barring that second quarter, I thought we were competitive in the game and put up some good fight, but gosh, it just, the culture around the club, or even the fact that it seems from, as a fan's perspective, the Adelaide Crows just don't have a culture. And that's a massive issue. A culture is critical to every sporting organisation and even every workplace. And the Crows just seem to absolutely lack one. The way Joshua Shelley was treated after the showdown was just mind-blowing. I mean, even if you disagree with what he did, and I said last week, I'm a fan of it just because I think it added heat to the rivalry, and he would have known the risk he was taking and if we didn't get the win and if he didn't perform, he knew that was a risk and was prepared to take that on. And I was happy to see a player really show that emotion. Really, for me, those comments showed less about dissing the Port fans and more him trying to really buy in to the Crows as a club, is how that felt to me, and go, well, they're our rivals, we'll try and rile them up, get around the rivalry. And then felt like every senior player to come out in the media and tell him and just publicly say that he was in the wrong and they shouldn't have done it. And it went against the culture of the club. Is just mind-blowing. Like, even if you think that's the case, you speak to him about that behind closed doors, and in the media you show your support. You don't need a young star of the competition disgruntled when you're a club that struggles bringing recruits anyway and has a history of players wanting to leave to go home to Victoria. I mean, there would be no surprise if in a couple of years he decides, and if this treatment continues, he decides he wants out to go home, and Carlton, who he supported growing up, come knocking. And that's just not what you need from the Crows, and it was really disappointing to see that was the case. The decision to drop him made no sense at all, especially when you consider it was the last game of the season. to think that all the senior players and the coaches and Matthew Nicks sat around and went, you know, this is the last game of the season. Let's go into the off season, dropping our young player after he's tried to show a bit of character and personality, and so that can linger over the team the entire off season. What is that? What are you thinking? I mean, I saw they did the Mad Monday where they dressed up for the golf in the outfits, and that would have been cool if it felt like any of them. It just felt like, oh, we're doing this as a bit of an act rather than actually wanting to be there. It was just, it was the treatment of Rochelle was so disappointing as a fan to see, and it just really soured an already poor season. And spoiler for the rankings that I've got coming, or the grades I've got coming up, I gave it a D-. The only reason it's not an F, like Fox Footy, I believe, gave the Crows as an F, is that there was a period in the season up until the Collingwood game when Rankin had that controversial running too far call that we ended up losing. And up until that point, there was about a month or a few weeks before that where it felt like we were starting to find form and like we could have kicked on. And then in that game, or after that play, Rankin gets injured, and that's when our season collapsed. And at one point, we had 6 of our best 18 players missing from the side for at least a few weeks. And yeah, Thilthorpe out, still recovering, who once he came back showed how good and important of a player he is. Millera was out as well. He went down earlier in the season. He's really important for us coming off half back. Rankin, as I said, is arguably our best player. It's him or Dawson, a 1A, 1B. Tex was out. Josh Worrell, who had a really good start to the season, and I had doubts about him coming to the season. He felt like one of those players who shows a lot of heart and fight for the team, but just isn't at the level. But the start of the season before he got injured was really impressive. He was really good and took a big step up. So we lost him. We lost Nick Murray as well in defence again, and that was another big injury. So 6 of our starting 18, it's not even of our 22, of our starting 18 had missing. And so that was the bit of leeway for that is why I'm giving it a D- instead of an F. But it was just, you thought after the Sydney result last year when the Crows were they just were robbed. It's just how it is. I'm not salty about it anymore. Like, I've moved on. It's just a fact that we were robbed and we probably would have gone out straight away. So it's not that big of a deal now. But you thought after that the Crows would really have an opportunity to kick on. It felt like, okay, our players are getting better, and it just fell down. We still haven't made finals since we made the grand final in 2017 when, shock horror, the Crows tried to instill some culture and absolutely fucked it in one of the worst off seasons for any club in any sport probably ever. Just the training camp from hell, which is that training camp, and hearing what happened there is the only time I've actually been genuinely ashamed to be a Crows fan. Like, I pretty much didn't want to tell people I supported them because I was like, how can I feel like I associate with that club after the treatment that happened in that camp? And it's clearly, we're still not over it. We still have issues in the club hierarchy that lack building a cohesive culture and needs a big overhaul. And so it's just, to miss out on finals again, it's just another disappointment. And we're gonna need some big signings through free agency or a big trade to bring in some real top end quality, because I do think the Crows have a good side, but it feels like we've got a lot of players where you're like, they're good role players on a top end side. We just lack the real top end star power. I'd say we've only got it in Rankin and Dawson, and then the likes of Rochelle, Thilthorpe can get there, and Fogarty, I think, is close as well. So, and Saligo, I think they're kind of the players you can see elevating, but we just need a bit more of that top end quality is what we're really missing. So that's what we need in the off season. If it just is status quo coming back in next year, I hope we have a good fast starter, else there'll be some big calls for Matthew Nix's job. And I have said previously in episodes that I think teams in general fire coaches too soon, but we're going into his 6th season. I think there's enough of a sample size to show that he may not be at the level required come if we struggle again next year. And he came in after a difficult period in trying to rebuild the culture, and the fact that we're now having cultural issues once again, it says, okay, well, what are we really getting out of this period? And so I've said it for a while to friends and family, and it's not even something I necessarily know if I want it to happen or not. It's just what I think will end up happening is that within the next 2 years, Matthew Nix will leave and Simon Goodwin will come in as the Crows coach. I think that's how it'll end up. I still haven't made up my mind if I think that'll be a good idea or not. I'll decide when for me, just looking at everything, I just feel like that's what's going to happen. I just think that's almost inevitable. So, I can just see that being the case, and I don't know if it'll be a good thing or not. I mean, Melbourne right now have their own issues as well, so it's almost a case of Melbourne is having so many issues that it's thankfully giving the Crows a bit of a break from being spoken about the way they probably should be in the dramas going on. So that's just what I expect to happen, and we'll see whether that's a good thing or not. But I'll get into some player performances as well now. We'll lose some of the players that I do think had really well, had some good seasons, whether it's good season for their expectations or just in general. And then also be discussing a few of the players who I think really didn't perform to the level we want, and what that kind of looks like moving forward. So we finished this section on a high. We'll start with the worst performers first. Rory Laird to end the season, I thought, was pretty shocking, to be honest. He's one of our best players. He's won 3 best and fairest. He'll probably be up there, to be honest, again this year. I think for the most part of the season, he was pretty good. It was just that end to the season. In the showdown, he was pretty terrible. Against Sydney, he was terrible. And after the comments he made about Rochelle in the media, I thought he was really poor. Brodie Smith, as well, as an experienced player, it felt like he'd aged this season. It felt like it really had caught up to him. Just a lot of basic errors that he doesn't normally make. I mean, he's normally a very good kicker of the ball. It felt like he was rarely hitting targets and really struggled. Didn't really provide that run off the halfback flank that he normally does. So I thought he had a really poor performance, and I saw a lot of Crows fans wanting to see him get dropped, especially when you saw Dan Curtin not getting game time. That was really seeing Smith play when he wasn't in form, but one of our top draft picks not getting picked, who performed well when he'd come in, was disappointing to see. Riley O'Brien in the ruck, I mean, he got dropped for a few games throughout the season, and he led the league in hitouts, and I believe hitouts to advantage as well. And he led the league in hitouts by like 100. Like, he won so many ruck contests. I was shocked to see that his percentage of hitouts to advantage is actually comparable to other ruckmen in the competition, because it felt like he would just straight up tap it to the other team constantly. It never went to the Crows players. And when you look at our midfield and Rankin and Dawson and Saligo, it's like, and Laird when he's playing well, and Matt Crouch, like, you look at that and go, we had good players in midfield, just they're never getting the tap of the ball, and other teams just win the clearances way too easily. And so I thought he had a really poor season. I think he's not that good on the ground either, so he then shows to provide that. He's not also like a massive, like he can take some marks on the wing to get out of trouble, but I wouldn't say he excels at that. And so I think a ruckman is really a position of need for the Crows. Looking forward, I don't know who that can be or where they come from, but yeah, Riley O'Brien I thought had quite a poor season. Lockie Murphy is a player that I love his passion and fight for the club, and it's kind of like how I spoke about Worrell earlier, where I thought where he's a player that just feels like he absolutely loves the club. He fights for every possession and disposal and puts his body on the line and really goes for it. I don't think he had a very good season. I think he just lacks that quality when he does get the ball. And so he's in the leadership group, but I just don't know where he fits in on a finals team. Like, I just don't know there's many other teams I don't know there's any teams who are currently in the top 10 that would actually really take him. And so when you look at that and you're comparing your squad, it's a case of, okay, well, if that's the level we're trying to get to, and I said I've gone for top 10, so it's still not even making finals in those last couple of positions. If that's the level we're aiming for, then if he doesn't fit in, well, we need to really look at moving on from him and really playing some other players that I think did have better seasons and probably deserve a bit more game time than they've got compared to him. Last player is Himmelberg. I think I don't want to talk too negatively about players in general, because I do believe they genuinely try the hardest and they get criticised a lot, and it's tough. And I think it's generally a case of like I try and be as positive as I can with things. It's just Himmelberg just always, every time I was watching games, I just felt like he was constantly out of position. I could never really tell what he was adding to the team when he played. It felt like it was a bit more, it felt like there were genuinely times it felt like he almost got in the way because he'd be out of position, and it's almost like if he wasn't there, at least the team wouldn't think to try and get him the ball. They would be able to just play it to players in better spots, and it's just, I thought it was really poor, and I just don't see it well where he is. I don't think he's in our best 22 as it is now, and especially not as we move forward. It's a bit like kind of Billy Frampton was for us, who's now moved to Collingwood, and I get Billy Frampton has won a flag at Collingwood as well last year. In my opinion, put in the worst grand final performance of all time, but still want a flag. But they're kind of two players that I just don't think really are at the level we require. And so if we could find a way to move him on to, say, a GWS, I think he might even be out of contract, so I just wouldn't bring him back. I don't think he's required. But if he does, and then we trade him to GWS to be with his brother, that'd be preferred. But looking at some of the best performances or best performers for us this season, number one, you can't go past him. I think there's a genuine case that he should have been in the All-Australian squad. He wouldn't have made the actual team, but the squad, I think Ben Keys had a phenomenal season. He's a player I've really tried to defend when speaking with friends and family about him, because he was a player who was previously in that role of like fights for everything, hard runner, tries his best, but when he got the ball, just really lacked the skills behind it. I mean, even now, he is still one of the most one-footed players in the comp. But this year, he took a massive step up in terms of his quality with the ball, his goal kicking, his positioning was way better this year. His ability as well as the defensive forward, I thought was really, that it felt like the game against, it might have even been the game against Collingwood. I think he might have played on Dacos. It it was a game like he played as like a defensive forward on one of the best halfbacks in the flank. It was relatively early this season, so I can't quite remember. And he played that defensive forward role and was phenomenal at it. And it felt like it was one of those games you're like, oh wow, like that was really good. And then from then he just took step after step, just continuously got better, and was one of our best performers this year. It'll be interesting to see how he goes in the club, best and fairest as well, when that's done. Phil Thorpe, when he came back from injury, you just saw how important he was to us, that marking key forward, can take pack marks, he's good at his feet, provides an option in the ruck as well as that second tall. He's just so important for us, and you could see we previously used Himmelberg and Gallant and Burgess to try and fill that void throughout the year, but you could just tell there was another step up in quality once he came back. And him and Fogarty, who also had a terrific year, I think, you could see, you're like, okay, well, that's the forward line for the future. And I can see them being two of the big key forwards and really taking over from Tex as the top guys in the forward line for us. And I'm glad Tex has just tonight announced, or the club have announced he's re-signed for next year, which I'm really happy about. I'm anticipating that'll be his last season, but I love the fact he's a one-club player. He can provide that experience to those guys for one more season around the club, so that's really good. He obviously, Tex himself, didn't have the same season he had the year before. I think we just in general struggled a bit more as an offense. He was up the ground a bit more than I think he was the year before. And so that really made a difference. It was kind of trading some of what Tex did to boost Fogarty. Felt like a bit more balanced than we had the year before. So didn't have the same year. Didn't have a bad year, I don't think. Struggled a little bit with injury throughout the season. Just some niggling things that would come up for like 1 or 2 weeks at a time. But he had an okay season. Isaac Rankin was phenomenal when he played. Unfortunately, just injuries and then the suspension, missed basically a third of the season. When he played, there was talks that he was on that trajectory for one of the best players in the comp. He would have no doubt been All-Australian had he played the full season. He's just, his ability with the ball, his excitement, he just weaves in and out of traffic. He's mesmerizing to watch when he's at his best. And if we can keep him fit and suspension free for a full season, I think that goes a long way to the Crows having a good season. I think Jordan Dawson had another fantastic season. The one at E1B with Rankin for best player in our team. You just could always tell whenever the Crows were doing something well, one of those two were involved heavily and really took that turnaround. I mean, in the showdown, when everything was kind of falling apart, Dawson was standing up and really trying to fight and pull the Crows back in it. And so I thought he had a really good season this year. Rochelle, I thought he's one of those players that I think gets so much focus that he can very quickly become underrated, because you almost have so much expectation on him for what he did in his first season and the glimpses he showed to be at, say, Rankin's level that he is now. But he's still young. He's still developing. I think he's 21. Like, I thought he had a really good year. It was something like 34 goals, maybe 30 goals, around that mark, with a ton of goal assists as well. He was heavily involved. I thought he was good. He knows the areas of his game he's got to work on, and he seems really motivated to work on those. He's addressed him. He comes across as someone who holds himself accountable for what he needs to do, which is why the treatment of him in the media to me felt so ridiculous from the Crows players coming out and talking about him, because he's someone who during the season came out and said, this part of my game wasn't good enough, I need to work on it. So he's aware of that. He holds himself to a higher level, and he knows what he has to work on. So it feels like a bit more of a quiet behind closed doors conversation could have been had about it if we did really have that big of an issue with how he acted and what performed. or how it all went down. And so I thought generally he had quite a good season. I thought some surprise packets from Zach Taylor coming in, debuting. I thought he showed some really good signs throughout the games. I mean, in that last game against Sydney as well, he got his first goal. Just real hard-nosed player. I thought he played really well. Hugh Bond was really good, I thought, when he played. Once he came in the side, he felt like you needed to keep him, and you just couldn't afford to drop him. I thought he was really impressive. And then Curvis coming in really quickly filled that Miller void where he sometimes gets himself into a bit of trouble because he just wants to take on everyone, but he succeeded a lot of times and it was really impressive. And there were times he could dart around a player, sell some candy, and he'd break through and get the Crows on the run. So I thought he had a really good season. I think he'll be really good next season as well. Worrell, as I said, was really good when he played. He was really impressive. Saligo took a massive step up, especially in the first half of the year. It felt like once the Crows kind of started to wane, and when you could really see after that Collingwood game, the Crows fall down, I thought he struggled a bit more. But in that first half of the season, I thought he was really good, and he still had those moments throughout the second half of the year, and he's only young, so I'm sure they'll keep getting better. He had a massive step up. Max McElhaney is unreal as a young defender. His game awareness, his ability to... He's quick enough to stay with smaller players. He's quite a good mark as well, I think, and just excellent reader of the ball is what I typically notice with McElhaney. So I think he's really, really good. And to me, they were the biggest standouts of this season that overall had very few from a Crows perspective. But hopefully next season's a bit better. And if nothing else, we've got the AFLW kicking off this weekend, which I'm really looking forward to. I think that should be good. Crows are at least good in that as well. And so hopefully we can contend for the flag once again and go for it and put up a good fight. So let me know your thoughts on the Crows season. Who you thought were the best performances, what was disappointing, what would you grade it as well? Let me know. But yeah, hopefully next season's better, but go the Crows, I guess. Time to grade every AFL team that missed out on finals season. Give some quick thoughts on how I think they went, how I think they might go next year, what their off-season potential will look like, maybe some standout players. And we'll kind of start off with Collingwood as they finished 9th and just work our way down to Richmond and give the thoughts. And don't forget to, in the comments as well, let me know your grade for each team and how you think they went. If you're a fan of any of these teams as well, let me know and how you think it'll go, what your hopes are for the off-season moving forward as well, and how you think that might look. But yeah, as I said, we'll start off with Collingwood. To me, I gave them a C. I know they're the reigning premiers and they missed out on finals, which is obviously a big drop-off. It just felt like it was one of those seasons where they struggled with injuries. Darcy Moore just had a real drop-off in form, which will be disappointing for them, but it felt as though it was one of those seasons where you're just like, this just has to be an anomaly. There's got to be something else going on, because he's a quality player. I think next year he'll bounce back. He'll be at his best. I couldn't see him being worse or at that same level. I think he's too good of a player to not rebound. But yeah, it just felt like they struggled with injuries. I mean, they ended up putting up some good fight. A bit of that magic come back late and win games kind of ran out a bit as well. So it felt like a bit of a perfect storm for them for things to go wrong a bit. But next year, I think they'll go back to being good. It'll be interesting to see how they go with some of the aging players like Steele Sidebottom, Jeremy Howe, Scott Pendlebury, all coming back. I think Pendlebury will be really good. He is a bit like a Chris Paul in the NBA for a bit of a comparison to me, where his game doesn't rely on his athleticism. He just is such a smart player that he'll always be really good and able to play as long as he wants to, injuries permitting. And so I think he'll be fine. Still Sidebottom and Jeremy Howe, I think, are the big ones where I would be a bit concerned if I was a Collingwood fan about potential drop-offs from them. I think they've got the most room kind of to manoeuvre. I think they both were fairly good this year, but I can see them really struggling next year, just age kind of catching up. So I think that'll be the barometer for their season. Nick Dacos and Josh Dacos as well had really good years as to be expected, and they probably will for the next decade and a half. Nick is a good chance to win the Brownlow. It'll be interesting to see how it comes out. I think Patrick Cripps is the current favourite, but Nick Dacos will definitely be up there and it'll be a shout. I wonder if it'll get a bit interesting at the Collingwood table if Nick does miss out and Josh ends up piling a few votes and almost takes it away from him. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out come Brownlow night. But I think Collingwood fans will be loving having them around. They're always players in off-season. It feels like, they're such a big club that players are always looking to move there. So I expect them next year to have a big bounce back and perform really well. Fremantle, I gave them a grade of a D. They just threw away too many big games, and that's just what cost them finals in the end. It just felt like they were getting a lot of close games and then would just throw it away late, and that's just what cost them. Next year, I think they'll be competitive again, a bit more indicative of how they were in that period when they were in that kind of upper mid finals situation, that kind of 3rd to 6th. That I can see them being around there next year. They've got a good list. They'll potentially get Shea Bolton, who'll be a big pickup for them. So I think that'll be better. Caleb Strong had a big breakout year as well, and so you can just see him kicking on next year as well. They had 5, I think, All-Australian players, the most of any side, which is a bit ridiculous for me to have a team that missed out on finals have more players in the All-Australian squad than any other team. Just doesn't make sense. I don't get that. But there was enough good signs from Fremantle for them to be disappointed and upset just in the manner in which they missed finals, but to then know next year they'll be really competitive, know what they've got to work on and how they'll go there. So I gave them a grade of a D. The big highlight for them was Caleb Strong's breakout. So moving to Essendon, who, same with Fremantle, I gave them the grade of a D. We found out that the Essendon Edge that was spoken about is actually just a cliff that will free fall from 2nd to 10th or 2nd to 11th actually is where they finished up. And I personally was never convinced by Essendon. I think to me they came across more as a team in good form at the start of the season rather than an actual good team, if that makes sense. They just felt, they had a lot of players kind of playing above their normal level, and eventually it kind of came back to earth and they struggled a bit more. Next year, who knows where they're going to finish up. It could be anywhere from 5th to 14th, to be honest. They're just one of those sides you have no idea what to expect. It makes it tough when you're in the directors or coaching staff and the head office to know potentially what to do in the off season. I guess any top end quality they can try and bring in would be worthwhile. What will they do with Jake Stringer as well, who's routinely known to, in a contract year, pretty much kick 40 goals and then drops off the next couple? Will they bring him back? What will they do? That'll be interesting to see. But the fans will be disappointed just the way they just fell down after such a good start. Just not what they're after, and next year, no idea what to expect from them at all. And there's one of those teams that I don't even really know too much to talk about them, because it just felt very Essendon, to be honest. They showed good signs and then fell off, and Dyson Heppell, the fact they didn't give him a proper send-off game in Melbourne is really disappointing. And I think one of the things I found that I really like or one of the things I really love about being a Lakers fan is that the Lakers are renowned for knowing how to treat their stars well. That's one of the things. And what that means is it often gets misconstrued as, say, like LeBron runs the team. And it's not necessarily that that's the case. It's more so they understand that the stars have a lot of importance, and that the reputation of the club and how they treat their stars is important, and it'll incentivize other players to come to the team and other big names to come too. And so when you look at an Essendon in the way that Dyson Heppell's one of their best ever players, was with them through the worst of times, came through that, then was captain of the club, to then not even give him a send-off. I get finals were on the line, but Dyson Heppell was never going to be the make or break. Him playing was never going to cost them finals. It was already a long shot before that. I think sometimes you need to look at the club as a whole and how you want to be perceived and the culture you want to have, and playing him should be in the right thing. But they didn't. He's moved on, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they go next season, because your guess is as good as mine as to how they'll finish up. St Kilda, I gave them a grade of C. I think they showed good signs late in the season. They started playing really well, got some big wins, rocketed up the table a bit. It was just a shame. It was kind of after the season was dead and buried, and so they were kind of just playing to ruin other people's finals chances and fun. And it's tough when teams are in that situation. To me, it's tough to tell whether that's actually a real indication of how good the team is, or if it's kind of, well, nothing matters because our season's over, so we can play with a bit more freedom. But come the start of next year, it'll be a bit more like the start of the year. So they'll be wanting for the latter part of the season to be a bit more of an indication into how things will play out next season. But to me, it all hinges on the supposed St Kilda war chest and how that goes, and what players they can bring in and how they spend that, because I think they need some real quality to come into that side if they're a chance to contend for finals next year. But not too much to say on St Kilda. The season was kind of over once they started playing well. I gave them a C grade. It was kind of just there and happened, to be honest. Gold Coast, I gave their season grade a D. You can't lose basically every away game you make. And I know they ended up winning two games away. I think it was the Essendon game and the Richmond game. Richmond were the wooden spoon for starters, and the season was already over by the time they did that. So disappointing. Damon Hardwick knows that where they need to improve. You saw it in his press conferences a lot. So I think after another off season, I expect them to have a big jump next year. The Daniel Rioli's looking like he's going to go up to pair with Damien Hardwick and have a bit of a reunion there. There's always rumours Dusty's going to come out of retirement to play for Gold Coast next year, and who else might join the Suns as well, because Damien Hardwick definitely is a coach that has some pulling power given his history and what he's achieved in the game. And so I think next year they'll take a big leap. I think they at least have the voodoo of the away games off the back. They won a couple. They did lose a couple at home, which kind of then cancelled each other out and is why they missed finals. But I think they learned enough. It was a disappointing season, but I think next year is the season where it's okay, you kind of have to make finals for anyone to be taking you seriously. Now they've still not made finals as a football club since their inception, and it's been what 12, 13 years now. What was it? 2012 they came in, so yeah, 12 going into 13 years that they since they were founded and still yet to make a finals appearance. And so it's just they need next year needs to be the year they do that, or else you don't know when that's eventually going to come. But I think it'll be the off-season. They've got the most potential in the off-season, or some of the most potential in the off-season, and bring in some big players with Damien Hardwick's pulling power, as I mentioned. And so that'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I'd love to be a fly on the wall to know how that off-season goes, because Damien Hardwick will know how to get the best out of them and what's required to turn a club around, as he proved with Richmond and took them from being terrible and not making any finals, and then eventually slowly build them up to the dynasty they became. And so I don't know, the Suns will get there, but if he can get them to a finals game and win a finals game, then I think the Suns fans will be happy to start with. So yeah, gave them a D grade. It was a disappointing season given their away form, but I think next year's the big test year for them. Melbourne, I gave them a F grade. Anything that could go wrong went wrong for Melbourne. They just, injuries, the Petrarca situation, Clayton Oliver coming in, Gawn just being wheeled out to the media repeatedly, the culture concerns as well with Goodwin being, and Petrarca having their issues. It just, and yeah, as I say, anything that could have gone wrong went wrong. Their off-season looks as though they've got players just wanting to go everywhere. Like, Oliver looks as though he might leave, although I think apparently he might be going and holidaying with Max Gawn, so hopefully you can help him out a bit from a Melbourne's perspective, help him out a bit, get his head right heading into next season, because he is a quality player, and this year just was terrible. And I think a lot of that off-season drama last year leading into it that played a big part. Petrarca, just who knows what's going to happen there. I mean, he apparently just wants the club to, he just wasn't happy with the way he was treated by the club for his injuries. I mean, I was listening to reading some news and listening to a podcast talking about it today, and they mentioned that apparently Petrarca's wife actually got called into the hospital on the off chance he died from his injuries, and that is mental, especially when you consider, and like, obviously, thankfully, didn't know, it would have been so tragic, but then you think the Crows cultural issues that I've got Melbourne confused. For the Melbourne coaches to then send him back on, and medical stuff, send him back on. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but if my coach essentially tried to kill me, or my employer tried to kill me, and then I'd probably be like, yeah, I don't particularly want to work here, shockingly. Don't know about you, but not really what I'm after in an employer. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see just how this all ends up, because he's such a good player. I don't know if anyone will be able to offer Melbourne what they'll be willing to accept. I mean, he's got such a long contract, so it's just wild situation altogether for such a club. Great for Melbourne. It was a big part in bringing them their first premiership since, what was it, the 50s. So yeah, it's interesting how it'll all play out. Their off-season feels like it's the most up in the air. I mean, Richmond we'll get to, but they've just got a mass exodus and will just be starting their rebuild. And then there's a few teams who have a bit of a war chest and will look to spend a bit of money to bring some players in. But Melbourne just feels like, who knows the direction they'll go in. Will they try and make a big splash to keep Petrarca happy, or will he end up moving on? It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But yeah, their season was an F. As I said at the start, anything that could go wrong just did, and they'll be looking to move on next season. But the off seasons where the true test comes for them, and what will happen for the club moving forward in their direction. Adelaide, D minus. I said it previously, earlier in the podcast. It just poor performances that fell off a cliff once Rankin got injured against Collingwood. Ended the season by throwing one of our star players and star prospects under the bus and showing a clear lack of culture. So that's going to be hanging over the entire off season. It just disappointing. Still haven't made finals since 2017 when we made the grand final and threw that whole squad away for outright stupidity in destroying a culture. And so to be here 7 years later, still having questions over culture is disappointing as a fan. But keeping it brief for them, the off season, we need a big off season. I think Van Boolen declared the Crows as his preferred destination, so that's good. There's rumours we'll be looking at Lukosius as well from Gold Coast, who I think would also be really good for the Crows. So hopefully we're at least making some attempts to really improve the squad and get that top end quality, because that's what we need. And in the same way that for Gold Coast, they said next year's the make or break year as almost a club. I think next year's the make or break year for Matthew Nicks. The Crows need to be in the hunt. It needs to be a much improved season from this year. If it ends up being like last season when we were that one wrong call away from finals, I think it'll be disappointing to not make finals again, but at least there could be enough positive signs that we're in contention, and then the following year you need to make it. But yeah, next year's the make or break season for Matthew Nicks, I think. West Coast, I gave them a C. We expected them to be poor. They were poor. They had periods where they showed good signs throughout the season, a bit more fight, but then they ended up sacking Simpson. They're struggling to find a coach, which is the worrying sign. If you're a fan, the fact they just can't seem to find anyone and everyone's just pulling out the race repeatedly. There's people you didn't even know were rumoured to be wanting it, just pulling out of it is a big concern. The article from a journalist in WA who suggested that Justin Langer take over the team it's hilarious because, yeah, why not get a cricket coach who failed as a cricket coach to then coach an AFL team? Why would you want that? I mean, I think that article also referenced because it worked in Ted Lasso. Yeah, do you know why it worked in Ted Lasso? Because it's a show, in my opinion, the best TV show of all time, but it's a show. They wrote it so it worked well. Yeah, no shit. Like you can't base fact off a TV show. But WA journalists, they've proven time and time again to be weird. That the article after Simpson left, the Chokers page about Fremantle leading into their final game when they could still make finals, it's just a bit backwards out there. But getting back to West Coast, yeah, struggling to find a coach, that's the big focus in the off-season for them. I think they'll be losing Tom Barras as well. He's expected to go to Hawthorn, I think he requested a trade to. And so we'll see what they get back from them. But their rebuild kind of continues. Harley Reid showed really good signs he's going to be a top player. Wavered in the sort of second half of the season, which is to be expected from a young player. I mean, the step up to AFL level is enormous. And so you expect him to kind of fatigue, especially when you play for a WA team. You have to do so much travel. Like, if you're not used to it, it's going to tire you out. And so I think next year he'll be improved again and be able to sustain it a bit longer. But that's kind of what West Coast were hoping for this year. It's what they got. I think it's kind of a C. They weren't at the bottom, so that helps. North Melbourne, I gave them a D+ grade. I mean, they were expected to be poor, and they did end up being poor. So in the same vein as West Coast, it's just the fact it's the fact they struggle so much without Harry Sheezel really is the dictating grade. When they don't have Harry Sheezel on the side, their average losing margin is 100 points. That's obscene for one player to make such a big difference, and that's the big concern for them. I think next year is the year they'll want to see the big improvement. I think that's a common theme throughout the finals, or the teams that miss finals, that next year there's a lot of teams that really are expected to make a big jump up, which will just, to me, next season is going to be even more competitive than this year, because, I mean, we had basically at one stage it was like 1st to 14th could make it. I mean, next year you could kind of look at even getting into the last few games of the season. I can see it being really close, in that kind of lower end of the 8 to that 14th, 15th range. I can see there being a lot of teams in that competition, in the competition for those places. And North will be, even if they're not in that competition, they'll want to show that there's a clear tier above. They're clearly above West Coast and Richmond, and there'll inevitably be some team that drops really far down. It might be a Melbourne if they have to hit the rebuild and Petrarca leaves. But I can see them really wanting to put themselves in a tier above and show some growth. And because I've seen calls that maybe Clarkson's not the right man, but it feels very soon for that to be starting, because it's been basically, a year, because I know last season was a bit tumultuous in what was going on. And so, I think it just disappointing season. It's the inability to perform without Harry Sheezel is the big concern and big reason why they got this grade to me, in being a bit lower than West Coast is what they want to see. I mean, Sherry had a big season. I think next year they'll want to see that really kick on. They've got enough signs that there can be improvement for them next year. And so North fans, I think, are more optimistic now than they have been in a lot of previous years. And fair enough. I think they've got enough signs to indicate they should be. Richmond, the final team, I gave them an F. They're going to have a mass exodus of players. They got the wooden spoon. But now's the start of their rebuild. Basically, Dusty's left, like that core of the dynasty has pretty much moved on now, and they'll be just starting that rebuild and seeing what they can get back for Bolton and Rioli. You got to feel for players like Taranto who moved there thinking they were moving to a dynasty and then kind of have found themselves in this exodus. Will they look to leave? It's rough for them. They'll be it's the start of their rebuild, like I said, and so it's going to be a tough few years. Richmond fans are no strangers to that. I mean, it was only a decade or so they were kind of in this position and were able to build themselves out of it, so they'll be optimistic it's possible. But now they'll just look back and be watching those highlight films from 2017 and their premierships that followed after that as well. So it's pretty simple for them. They're going to have a mass exodus. They got the wooden spoon. It's an F grade. It's going to be a tough few years, I think, for Richmond going forward. But that's my grades for the teams that missed out on the finals in the AFL. Let me know the grades you'd give for the teams below. And as I said before, if you're a fan of a team, let me know how you think you went, what you'd give it as a grade, what you're looking forward to next season, or what you think your team might do in the off season. Let me know in the comments below your thoughts around that. Thank you for listening. That's been another episode of the Armchair Athlete podcast. As I said at the start, please remember to like and subscribe, or like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notification bells as well, and make sure you go back and listen to previous episodes if you haven't already. Let me know as well in the comments below thoughts on the episode, what we've discussed, if there's anything further you want me to discuss moving forward, whether across any sports, just general topics you want me to go through, just let me know in the comments below. Really try and boost up the engagement as well. It just helps a lot for the channel in trying to grow and get a bit better as well. But I appreciate your time and listening, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.